Once upon a sin where stories are no longer told with innocence, but with blood in the ink and longing in every line. These aren't bedtime tales. They're temptations wrapped in shadow, curses bound in silk. And sometimes, someone learns that escape isn't the end of the story. It's where the sin begins. Tonight we return to the tower, not the one in your picture books. This one breathes, this one burns, this one waits for the climb. Rapunzel's sin. They locked her away, high in the tower, far above the reach of any man. They said it was to protect her. But Rapunzel had learned long ago, the only things that grow in cages are hunger and secrets. Her hair stretched longer than her dreams now, golden, heavy, and thick as rope. It coiled around her like a living thing, like the touch she was never allowed to have. Every night she brushed it slow, and watched the forest from her window, whispering not prayers, but invitations. She didn't want saving. She wanted to be found. And one night, someone answered. He didn't call out. He didn't knock. He stood in the shadows beneath the tower, looking up, drawn by the rumors of a witch's pet, locked away for her protection, or the world's. She saw him before he saw her. He was no prince. His hands were calloused, his shoulders broad beneath worn leather. A scar traced his jaw like a question left unanswered. But his eyes, they were the kind that looked at locks and thought about what it would take to open them. He looked hungry. She smiled. "Climb," she whispered, leaning out the window, her golden braid unraveling like a promise. It slid down the stone in silence, thick and inviting, until it brushed the forest floor. He hesitated, just once. Then he gripped her hair with both hands and began to climb. His boots hit the cold stone of the tower floor with a soft thud, the braid still wrapped around his fist. She hadn't moved. She stood a few feet back, barefoot, her gown loose around her shoulders, spun from the same pale gold as her hair. Her eyes held him, not with fear, not with innocence, but with intent. He let go of the braid, slowly. "They said there was a girl up here," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "Trapped." She tilted her head, stepping closer, bare feet silent on the stone. "Do I look trapped to you?" The candlelight flickered. Her gown slipped slightly, revealing one pale shoulder and the marks where the braid had pressed too long against her skin. "No," he admitted. "You look dangerous." She stopped just in front of him. "And you look like someone who came to steal a kiss and run." He didn't deny it. Her fingers reached for him, not his hand, but his belt, the leather worn, the buckle cold beneath her touch. "What happens if I don't let you leave?" His breath hitched. "That depends." "On what?" He swallowed. "On how badly you want to be ruined." Rapunzel's smile was slow and wicked. "Sweetheart," she whispered, pressing her lips to his jaw. "I've been locked in a tower for 19 years. I invented the art of longing." She pulled him in, not gently. Her fingers tangled in the front of his shirt, dragging him down to her mouth like he was water, and she'd gone thirsty too long. Their kiss wasn't soft. It was punishment for time lost, for nights spent dreaming instead of doing. His hands found her waist, her back, the curve of her hips. She felt real, too real. Not the innocent girl in the window, but something warmer, wilder, wrapped in silk and want. She bit his lip. He groaned against her mouth and backed her toward the bed, if you could call it that. A mess of furs and sheets piled near the window where she could lie in the sun like a kept thing. But she wasn't kept anymore. She was taken. He pushed her hair aside, the long braid trailing behind her like a lifeline. His hands slid under the gauzy fabric at her hips, and she let her head fall back as he tasted the skin at her throat, then lower. "You've been waiting for this?" he rasped, voice rough with restraint. I've been aching for it, she breathed. Now stop teasing. He didn't. He dropped to his knees like a man before an altar, but it wasn't worship. It was hunger, the kind you feed with teeth and tongue and hands that grip hard enough to bruise. And Rapunzel didn't beg. She writhed. She cursed. She arched into every touch like it might be her last. The tower, once silent, filled with the sounds of breath and friction and the whispered crack of restraint breaking. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, like sin was light and easy to carry. She wrapped her legs around him, hair trailing like gold in water, her body heat pressed to his chest, her lips on his throat. And when he entered her, slow, thick, deep, her gasp wasn't gentle. It was a sound of something breaking open. His grip on her thighs tightened. Her nails dug into his shoulders. And for a moment, the world outside the tower didn't exist. There was only this, the sound of rain against stone, thunder in the distance, and the slick, sinful rhythm of two people losing themselves. Each thrust was a promise she'd waited years to hear. Each roll of her hips was a story he'd never be able to tell. She bit his shoulder when she came, hard, and he didn't stop. He wanted more. He needed more. And when he followed her into the dark, into that moment where thought ceased and only feeling reigned, he whispered her name like it was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. After, she lay tangled in his arms, golden hair around them like a halo with thorns. He tried to speak, but she pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't ruin it," she whispered. "Not yet." They said she was locked away to keep her safe, but they were wrong. She was locked away to keep the world from knowing what she was capable of. Now the tower's silent again, but the girl in it, she's not innocent, and she's not alone. But not all stories begin with towers. Some start with fire, some with feathers, and some with a choice that should never have been offered. Let me tell you another. The Hollow Wife. They called him the Carver, not because he was skilled, because he was obsessed. He lived alone, on the edge of the forest that no one walked after dark. His home was little more than wood stacked on stone. No visitors, no warmth, no noise but the wind through the trees and the sharp snap of his tools. The only thing louder was the ache in his chest. And so in the thick quiet of winter, he began to make her. Not a toy, not a sculpture, a woman, a wife. He didn't begin with the face. That was too intimate, too final. He started with her legs. The grain of the ashwood ran smooth under his fingertips. He chose it because it was strong but flexible, feminine. The way it curved naturally made him think of knees drawn close together, of hips. He sanded until his palms were raw, until her calves were sleek and soft as ivory. He carved the arch of her feet carefully because she would walk for him, because he would teach her. Then the thighs, rounded, perfect, not too thin. She would be warm, even in wood. She would sit on his lap and rest her cheek on his shoulder, and he would feel those carved thighs wrap around him and think, I made this. He worked through the coldest nights, with nothing but firelight and his breath fogging the air. The torso took weeks, not because it was difficult, because he wanted it right. His chisel slowed at her ribs, pausing between each one. He wanted her to seem as if she could breathe, as if, just beneath the wood, something waited. The swell of her breasts came next, smooth, supple, shaped with trembling fingers. Not too large, just enough, just what he liked. He'd trace them at night when the tools were down, not touching in lust, but in reverence, his thumb brushing the edge where wood met curve, and lower still. He carved everything, even the folds no one else would see. He saved her face for last, not because he feared it, but because he wanted to earn it. He had already shaped her hands, long fingers that could hold his own. He had carved her spine, her nape, her hips, with aching precision. Each night he sat beside her, tracing her unfinished head, whispering things he never said aloud. Promises, apologies, fantasies. She was silent, but her silence comforted him. Until it didn't. The first chisel stroke across her cheek was the deepest cut he'd ever made. Not in wood, in himself. Because this was where she would look at him, this was where she would know him. He shaped her lips first, soft and full, slightly parted. A permanent breath between thoughts. A mouth that looked like it had just whispered his name. He didn't want her smiling, he wanted her wanting. Her nose came next, straight and delicate, and her cheekbones, high, regal, like the women he used to watch from afar and pretend not to ache for. The ones who laughed at men with splinters on their fingers, who passed him in town with silken gloves and no glance at all. But this one would never pass him by. Her brows were arched, slightly furrowed, as if she were always on the edge of waking, of realizing what she was. And then, her eyes. He carved them open. Not closed in peace, open, always watching. He didn't paint them. He didn't need to. In the candlelight, the shadows danced inside them like flame. They were deep, hollow, waiting. He pressed his thumb to her lips once she was complete. "You're mine," he whispered. "I made you perfect." And the wind outside went very still. He kept her in the center of the cabin, just beyond the hearth, where the fire could warm her wooden skin. He wiped her clean each morning, brushed away sawdust from her hair, which he'd carved in long, soft waves that curled around her breasts and down her spine. He hadn't given her clothes, not because he wanted to shame her. Because she was his, she didn't need to hide. He whispered to her as he ate, as he worked, as he slept beside her on the floor, her carved eyes open, always watching. At night, he curled up around her legs and pressed his face to her thighs just to feel the shape of her there. The curve he'd made, the place he'd imagined over and over, wood so smooth it might as well have been flesh. She'll move when the time's right, he told himself. But something in the room already had. It began in her chest, not her heart. She had none, just a hollow space where one might have been carved, but wasn't. But something stirred, a shiver in the grain, a murmur in the wood, a memory not of life, but of being chosen. The tree she'd been cut from had been old, sacred, once used for ritual fires, for altars, for binding things that should not be named. And now she was shaped into a woman, touched by hands that believed they could control her, owned by a voice that had named her without asking, loved like an object. But wood is not flesh, wood remembers. The first time she moved, he didn't see it. Her fingers curled when his back was turned, slow and silent, the joints creaking softly like branches in a dream. Her eyes did not blink, but her lips, those carved, parted lips, shifted, not into a smile, into something like thought. He sat at his workbench whittling a second figure, a smaller one, softer, something meant to sit on the shelf and smile forever. He didn't speak to the hollow wife that night, didn't trace her shoulders, didn't whisper his nightly apology or cradle her hair against his chest. He'd moved on. She saw it, the curl of his lip as he shaped the new one's breasts, the quiet hum under his breath, one he used to save for her. The hollow wife sat in her place by the fire, unmoving, but inside the grain split, a heat built in the hollow of her chest, not from the fire, but from anger, from awakening. He had made her want. He had carved her beautiful. He had taught her to feel the press of fingertips, the ache of watching without being touched. And then he ignored her. She moved again. This time he saw. He turned when the flame flickered too sharply and caught her face in full light. Her head tilted, just a little too much. His breath hitched. The chisel dropped from his hand, clinking to the stone floor. He stood slowly. "Did you—" But her eyes didn't blink. They just looked. And her lips, those soft wooden lips he'd kissed once in drunken loneliness, opened, just a sliver, enough to whisper his name. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the hearth with the unfinished doll on the table and the hollow wife in her place, except she wasn't in her place. She'd moved again, just enough to shift her knees, her hands resting in her lap, the way he used to pose her before he knew, before he suspected. He told himself it was the shadows, the flicker of firelight playing tricks, but deep down he knew she was awake. At midnight she stood. No sound, no hesitation. She moved like someone who had always known how to move, like the body carved for her had simply waited for permission. The boards creaked beneath her feet as she walked toward him, and he flinched, eyes wide, breath caught halfway between awe and terror. "Yeah, you're," he stammered. Her hand slid up his chest. She didn't speak. Her thumb brushed his lips, the same way he had touched hers. "You made me empty," she whispered, "and then filled me with yourself." Her voice was low, wooden, beautiful. He stared at her, trembling. "I made you perfect," he said, half pleading. "I made you everything I ever—" "You made me yours," she interrupted, her fingers curling around his throat, "but forgot to ask if I wanted to be." He gasped as she pushed him against the wall, not hard enough to harm, but enough to remind him that she was not delicate. Not anymore. Her strength was in her stillness, her silence, her certainty. "You gave me a body," she said, dragging his hand down her waist, across the curve of her hip. "Then you acted like I couldn't feel it. I didn't know you could. You carved my thighs, my mouth, my breasts. You made me feel need. And then you left me cold." Her lips were close now, breath cool against his cheek. Her hand loosened on his throat. "I was never a wife," she whispered. "I was a mirror, and now I show you what you are." He tried to run. Of course he did. But he'd built the door too heavy. He always said it kept out the cold. She reached it first. With a single palm, she pressed it shut. He backed away, hands trembling. "Please, I didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to what?" Her voice was quieter now, but lower, rooted. "Didn't mean to make me ache. Didn't mean to touch every inch of me and then abandon your creation." She stepped forward. Her feet made no sound. Not anymore. She was lighter now. "I wanted you to love me," he whispered. She tilted her head. "You wanted me to love you." Behind her, the fire cracked loudly. The flames climbed higher than they should have. Sparks danced on the air, and the scent of smoke turned thick with something else, like pine sap and old blood. She turned to the hearth, reached inside, and pulled out the chisel. She didn't use it on him. She didn't have to. She walked to the table where the smaller doll waited, still half finished, still smiling in her dumb, empty way, and brought the chisel down. Once, then again, until there was nothing left but shavings and splinters. She turned back to him, lips dark with soot, eyes glowing with something that didn't belong in wood or woman. "Now you're alone again," she said softly, "and this time it's your own hands that did it." Then she walked to the window, opened it wide, and stepped out into the snow, barefoot, unbothered, and the forest welcomed her back. They say he still lives in that cabin, alone, surrounded by dolls he carves, all with her face. But none of them ever move, because the fire doesn't bless them, not like it did her. But fire isn't the only place where sin begins. Sometimes it begins in water, and the sea has never forgotten how to take what it wants. Come closer. The final tale waits beneath the waves. The deepest sin. They say she was born of sea foam, but that's a lie. She was born of longing. The kind that curled into your bones and whispered in your blood. The kind that made you stare up at the surface, not with curiosity, but with hunger. The youngest daughter of the deep was not the prettiest, not the kindest, but she was the boldest. She watched the shore from beneath the waves, hour after hour, eyes fixed not on sunlight, but on him. The prince? Not the kind from songs. The kind who trained with a blade until his knuckles bled. Who sat alone at night on the rocks above the tide, sleepless, shadowed, and sharp around the edges. He was not perfect, but he was real. And the little mermaid, who had no name but was nothing short of wild, wanted him. She wanted his hands, his voice, his weight pressing into hers. She didn't want a crown. She wanted collision. She went to the sea witch, of course, but not like the stories tell it. There were no potions, no writhing eels or storm clouds. There was only a cave, carved into the bone-white cliffs beneath the sea, a place where the current didn't move and the light didn't reach. The witch waited in silence. She already knew why the girl had come. "I want him," the mermaid said. Her voice didn't tremble. The witch looked her over, wild red hair floating around her like smoke, bare shoulders, sharp jaw, too much fire for the sea, too much heat for the deep. "And what will you give me?" "My voice," she said. The witch tilted her head. "Number, that's too easy." The girl narrowed her eyes. "Then what?" The witch smiled. Cruel. Beautiful. "Your pleasure," she said. "You'll still feel, still crave, but you won't be able to release, not until he begs for you, not until he falls." The mermaid hesitated, just for a breath. Then she nodded. The witch placed her hand over the girl's heart. The spell cut deep, deeper than magic should. And when the mermaid swam to the surface, legs trailing behind her like smoke turned to skin, she left behind more than her tail. She left behind the right to surrender. Now she walks on land, and every step hurts. But not as much as wanting him. He found her at dawn, not washed up, not broken, but waiting. She sat on the black rocks at the base of the cliffs, the tide licking at her ankles, her hair soaked and clinging to her bare back. The white shift someone had given her clung too tightly to her skin, translucent in places it shouldn't be. But she didn't cover herself. She didn't flinch. He stood above her, watching, and she looked up, those sea-dark eyes locking onto his, eyes that had watched him, studied him, hungered for him from beneath the surface. He didn't know her name. She didn't speak it, but the ache in his chest was instant. He stepped closer. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. He offered his hand. She took it. And when her fingers wrapped around his palm, soft and wet and intentional, he felt it, a pull in his spine, in his breath, in his blood. She followed him back to the cliffs. She never said a word. But she didn't need to, because every step she took beside him was a step toward ruining them both. The castle was nothing like the sea. Hard edges, cold stone, walls that echoed instead of breathing. But she moved through it like she belonged, barefoot, silent, soaking wet. He should have sent her away. He knew that. But instead, he brought her to his chambers. He wrapped her in blankets, watched her shiver, placed her near the fire like she was some fragile, lost thing. But she didn't shake. She watched him. Her eyes followed the line of his throat, the way his fingers worked the laces of his tunic, the subtle flex in his jaw as he breathed. She had no words, but she didn't need them. She stood slowly, letting the blanket fall. Not with innocence, but with intention. Her skin steamed in the heat of the fire, droplets rolling down the inside of her thighs. Her hair hung in wet ropes across her breasts, the tips of them beating with salt. His eyes devoured her. He stepped toward her, then stopped. "You don't even know me," he said, voice raw. She stepped into his space, chest to chest, palm to heart. Her eyes never blinked. I know enough, they said. His hands found her waist, hesitant, shaking. But when her mouth brushed his, barely just the softest graze of lips, he lost the fight. He kissed her like he was falling. She kissed him like she wanted him to drown. He tried to be careful, tried to treat her like something precious, fragile, but the more he touched, the more he realized she wasn't trembling. He was. Her skin was warm from the fire, still damp in the hollows, slick where salt water hadn't yet dried. His fingertips traced the line of her collarbone, and she leaned into the touch like a tide pulling in. Slow, certain, irresistible. She didn't guide his hands. She didn't need to. She offered. And he took. He kissed the spot behind her ear, soft and searching. Her breath hitched. Not because it was new, but because it had been so long since someone touched her like she could feel. His lips traveled down the curve of her throat. Each breath he left behind a promise. His hands smoothed across her back, exploring the ridges of muscle, the dip of spine, the rise of hip. She arched into him, not urgently, but sensually. A rhythm, a dance. She couldn't moan, couldn't speak, but she didn't have to. Her body spoke, the way her thighs parted, when his hand slipped lower, the way her mouth found his again and again, open and greedy. He lay her back on the bed, slow and reverent. The firelight painted her in gold, her red hair a spill of wine across the pillows, her chest rising with each breath like she was remembering what it meant to need. And still, no words. Just fingers trailing the inside of her thighs. Just teeth at the curve of her breast. Just his voice ragged and desperate. Tell me what you want. No, show me. And she did. He kissed her like he was afraid she'd vanish. Not vanish from the room, but from him. And she let him take his time. Let him explore her inch by inch, lips following fingertips, breath falling into the soft spaces he touched. Her body arched to meet his mouth when he trailed it across her navel. Her legs opened for him like a secret. Still no sound. But her thighs trembled when he pressed his tongue lower, when he licked up the taste of her, the ocean and woman, salt and need. And still she didn't speak. She couldn't. But her fingers clawed the sheets, her back arched, her body told him everything he needed to know. He came back up to her slowly, dragging his lips over her stomach, her breast, her collarbone, each kiss a vow. When he reached her mouth again, she pulled him into it. He pushed inside her with one long, deep stroke, flesh parting for flesh, her heat welcoming, wet and waiting. And that was when she gasped, soundless, but unmistakable. He held still, then thrust again, harder, deeper. Her body moved with his, not just receiving, but meeting him, urging him, owning him. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering against her skin, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you came from. His hips rolled again, making her whimper, silent, shaking. But I know this. I'll never let you go. She cupped his face, her eyes burned. Not with pain, with promise. They came together, her mouth wide with breathless silence, his voice breaking her name across her neck like prayer. And in that moment, she was whole, not because he gave her pleasure, but because he shared it, because he gave it back. The next morning, she spoke. No magic, no curse lifted, just choice. Just her voice, raspy and low and thick with everything she'd never said. You're mine now. And he, smiling, naked, bruised and marked by her hands, nodded once. Yes. And so she did not lose her voice. She gave it away and took it back with interest. He did not rescue her. He worshipped her, and in return she drowned him, slowly, sweetly, with nothing but touch. Some fairy tales don't end in weddings. They end in beds, in breath, in promises made in the quiet aftermath of sin. This has been Once Upon a Sin, and every tale you've heard, it was only the beginning. Sleep tight, sinner. You've earned it.